Now.
Right. Good afternoon, brethren. Once again, this afternoon's Zoom meeting is a lecture by our Right Worshipful Master, Lord Michie, who is also a past master of the Earl Hague Lodge 1260, a past substitute master of Fife and Ross, and well known to most of the people who are on this Zoom meeting this afternoon. He's also the head of fundraising for Poppy Scotland, and through his work has helped to enhance the image and notoriety of Poppy Scotland by his sterling work. I'll hand you over to Gordon now for today's lecture.
Thank you, immediate past master, Brother Robert Clark. As one of your first duties as co-host, mute all the participants.
I've done that.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, Bern, and welcome along to the Lodge Hope of Karachi. This is our 15th Zoom presentation. I do apologise for the last minute of how this presentation's come along, as we normally meet on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on Friday afternoon contemplating what I would normally be doing this Saturday or yesterday, as we would normally commemorate Armed Forces Day at work, and we would join together with a variety of veterans associations in the Royal British Legion Scotland in Edinburgh to show our support for the Armed Forces community. During the lockdown, coincidentally, I'd been pulling together a presentation on Freemasonry and Remembrance. And after looking at the weather report, I felt, well, maybe this is a way that our lodge can show our support of Armed Forces Day. So please bear with me. This is the first time that I presented this. The genesis of it was during 2018 as a thank you to a variety of lodges who donated money to Poppy Scotland. And I pulled together a small presentation about the connection of Freemasonry and Poppy Scotland. This presentation goes slightly further, deeper into that connection, but it also extends to other lodges, other constitutions and other organisations out with Poppy Scotland. So I do hope that you enjoy the next 40 minutes or so. So as our secretary said, the presentation is Remembrance and Freemasonry, and that's a little bit about who I am in terms of a Masonic context. In the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we have a definition of remembrance. That definition is remembrance honours those who serve to defend our democratic freedoms and way of life. We unite across faiths, cultures and backgrounds to remember the service and sacrifice of the Armed Forces community from Britain and the Commonwealth. During this presentation, you may hear me speak about the Empire. That's what the Commonwealth was when we talk about the First World War period in time. What I would ask you to do when you're listening to me over the next 40 minutes or so is to ponder a few things. Why do we as Freemasons take part in remembrance in such a public way when so many other organisations don't? Why do we as Freemasons continue to remember? Do our rituals encourage remembrance? And was it our teachings that helped inspire remembrance? Without going into any of the secrets of the third degree, and having looked at the tile, there's no enter apprentices or fellow of crafts with us. This is one of the best descriptions that I could find about what the third degree is. It teaches the immortality of the soul. The truth being that whilst man withers away to crumble and decay, with something that will never perish. The third degree in Freemasonry stirs men to serve the truth by steadfastly maintaining their noblest aspirations, even in the face of appalling adversity, out of which can rise a more perfect tribute to our Masonic ideal. Now, to talk away that was to do with the third degree, Bern, I would say that that was a fitting description of what remembrance is as well. Robert Lawrence Binion wrote these lines. They were published in the Times newspaper in September 1914. And at most and across the Commonwealth, they are one of the first lines that you'll hear. They shall not grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. He wrote those lines on a North Cornwall coast that couldn't be so further away from the atrocity of the battlefield. And as you can see from that picture, the beauty of the Cornwall coast. And it was written just after the outbreak of the First World War, before anyone could imagine the terror and tragedy that we were to suffer as a nation over the next 4 or 5 years. Binion was too old to enlist in the military, Brian, but he went to work for the Red Cross as a military medical orderly. And he lost several close friends and his brother-in-law in the war. He wasn't a Mason though. I have researched that with the Grand Lodge of England, but we cannot find that if he was a Mason or not. So why do I feel that I can talk about Freemasonry and Remembrance? Well, anyone can, I suppose, but I've got a particular interest in it. I did serve my country in the Royal Air Force between 1988 and 1995, and I currently work for one of the two lead organisations in Scotland that look after Remembrance. There's another connection, however, and it's my Masonic connection. I was initiated into Lodge Errol-Hague, that takes its name from our nation's founder of Remembrance, Field Marshal Brother Lord Errol-Hague, who I will talk to about in a few minutes. As our secretary said, I'm a past substitute provincial Grand Master of our province, and I'm currently the Master of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, who are providing these lockdown lectures for us. And you can see a couple of photographs of me there. I was only a clerk in the Air Force, but they did trust me in the back seat of one of those fancy Tornadoes for about 4 or 5 hours, which was a really exciting day, through to my Masonic stuff. And one of the very most poignant things that I get to do within my day job, laying a wreath on behalf of our nation every year in Edinburgh. It all came about, Brian, because of the First World War. 1 million British Empire soldiers killed, and of that 150,000 jocks. 1.25 million left disabled, 279,000 widows, 380,000 orphans. Numbers we just can't contemplate today in current warfare. Current warfare is bad enough, Brian, but the plight, the horror, the horrific sacrifice that our forebears went through is just unimaginable in the 21st century. In the aftermath of the First World War, Field Marshal Errol-Hague, who had been the Commander-in-Chief of the British forces towards the end of the war, he was horrified by the plight who'd returned. There has been a lot of political debate and discussion about Hague. My belief is that his decisions ended the war and saved tens of thousands, if not millions of lives. And when he was touring the battlefields after the war, he discovered French widows selling poppies. An American professor also came across these French widows selling poppies, and on her return to the US, she vowed always to wear a red poppy, and she was the first one who made and sold them in the United States. And I will come back to talk about Professor Michaels in a little bit. The other lady who was involved was a lady called Anna Guerin, a French lady who was selling the poppies in France, and she came over and she met with Field Marshal Hague, and she was the one who inspired him or convinced him to take on the poppy as our nation's symbol of remembrance. At that time, Hague was pulling together a variety of ex-servicemen's associations into one, and he became the founder and the first president of the British Legion, of the British Legion Scotland, and the Errol-Hague Fund. The royal appendage to those two bodies came in 1971. It's also interesting to note, Brian, that the Royal British Legion Scotland is 8 weeks older than its sister organisation, the Royal British Legion, based in London. At the same time, a poem was written about Flanders Fields. It was written by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, a Canadian doctor, who'd served a couple of tours and he lost a very good friend at the Battle of Lewes. And he penned this poem about the battle. In Flanders fields, poppies blow in the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely sing and fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high, if you break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. And there are the poppies in the trenches of Flanders fields, still growing to this day, Brian. And that poppy, that flower that grew out of the battlefields, has become the Commonwealth's symbol of remembrance. He also saw that there was an opportunity to use the poppy to become a tool for fundraising. And next year we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first poppy appeal. And he set up the first poppy factory in Richmond in 1922 on the banks of the Thames with disabled ex-servicemen, and they made the poppy by hand. There are very few ex-servicemen left at Richmond, but here in Scotland, at the Lady Hague Poppy Factory, that was set up by his wife in 1926 because he could not supply enough poppies to Scotland, all of the poppy makers are disabled ex-service men, and we have one woman poppy maker. That first poppy factory was established in the Canongate at Whiteford House, and her design for the Scottish poppy was slightly different, as I hope you all know. The Scottish poppy has 4 petals and no leaf, which makes it botanically correct, as opposed to the poppy for the rest of the UK, which is 2 petals and a leaf. Now, it was Lady Hague, and like all good Scottish housewomen, although she was an aristocratic housewife, she was being rather frugal with the pennies, because the Scottish poppy, being of 3 parts, was cheaper to make than the poppy for the rest of the UK of being 4 parts, and more money could then be spent on the veterans. Field Marshal died in 1928, just as his 2 fledgling organisations were getting up and running, the British Legion movement. He's buried alongside his wife Dorothy at Dryburgh Abbey, which is near to the family seat at Beamerside. He comes, as many of you will know, from the Hague whisky family, the dynasty. I'm from Markinch, and I grew up in an area of Markinch called North Hall, and there's a cemetery at the end of the road, and that's where many of the Hague whisky family are buried. And I can assure you, Brian, their gravestones are a lot more expensive, a lot more glittery than the Field Marshal, who wanted to be seen as with one of his boys. It's a standard Commonwealth Grave Commission headstone, as we'll talk about later on, and it has the crest of his regiment on the reverse of it. He lies within 5 yards of another famous Freemason from the borders, and if you ever get the chance, Bern, to visit Dryburgh Abbey, I would really encourage you to do so. After the passing of the Field Marshal, another Freemason took the reins of Poppy Scotland, and our second president and the president of the British Legion was the Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Jellicoe. He was Admiral of the Fleet who commanded at the crucial Battle of Jutland. He was the son of a captain in the Mercantile Marine, and he was educated at the famous Naval School of Rottingdean, and he entered service in 1872 as a cadet. He was a joining member of the Navy Lodge 2612 that still meets in London, and just recently I was gifted this book, The History of Navy Lodge, by Brother Captain David Swain, who is the current Grand Secretary of the Metropolitan Grand Lodge in London. Lord Jellicoe went on to become the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New Zealand and the Provincial Grand Master in Tasmania at the same time he was serving the Governor of New Zealand. Interestingly, Brian, when we remember, we generally remember about those on our side. But there's always two sides to conflict. Angelico's arch enemy was Grand Admiral von Tirpitz, and we've all heard of the Tirpitz battleship. But von Tirpitz was also a Freemason, Brian. And he was the one who developed the small German Imperial Navy of the late 1800s into that world-class force that we were fighting. He was a member of Lodge zur Aufrichtigung, Herzen in Frankfurt. So as we've seen in many conflicts over the last 300, 400 years, we've had brethren fighting brethren. I had the opportunity to visit with Lord Elgin a few years ago, and he was telling me the story about when Haig visited his father, and he told me about a letter he wrote to the United Grand Lodge of England's magazine, issue number 9, if you've got it in your collection, Brian. And the letter tells us that Lord Haig came to visit at Broom Hall in order to visit a club of ex-servicemen that had been developed in the local town of Dunfermline. My father told me that in the morning following this dinner of the ex-servicemen, Haig said that he was hoping to be able to form a number of these groups all over Scotland. These groups became the Royal British Legion Scotland as we know them today. He goes on to write that there was a discussion between Haig and Elgin, and he asked him, "You didn't by chance become a Freemason, did you?" And Haig apparently looked surprised, but admitted that as an undergraduate at Oxford, he'd joined the local lodge at Leven in Fife, near to Cameron Bridge Distillery, and he'd become a Freemason in Elgin's lodge at Leven. That lodge had been named after the 5th Earl, who was Grand Master Mason in 1761. My father then discovered from the lodge secretary that indeed Haig, described as an undergraduate, had taken his 1st and 2nd degrees and was still waiting his 3rd. So a suitable date was arranged, and that was nearly 32 years later, Brian. An amazing amount of time between degrees, not like today, but I suppose that the Field Marshal was relatively busy saving our nation to continue his Masonic career. The picture, Brian, is at the D-Day commemorations at the French Embassy, French Consulate in Edinburgh, taken last year. You can see myself kneeling beside Lord Elgin, and the lady is Dr. Claire Armstrong, the Chief Executive of Legion Scotland. Unfortunately, I think that's pretty much one of Lord Elgin's last public appearances, because as we know, he's had a bit of a rough time over the last few months. But that day, he was as witty as usual, Brian. He had a little dig about my waistline, as he normally does. But he did, as he always does, send his best to his province. So back to Haig, Brian. Initiated in Elgin's Lodge at Leven in 1881, passed and raised in 24, and he became Right Worshipful Master for a year in 25-26. Rapid promotion, Brian. He was made an honorary member of number 2, and he became a Grand Senior Deacon of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. And he was Senior Grand Deacon under the United Grand Lodge of England as well. Within Elgin's Lodge at Leven, there are a couple of photographs of a complimentary dinner that he attended. And on the one that's on the right of my screen, you can see Brother Lord Elgin, the Master, and Lord Earl Haig sitting there. And you can also see him on the Past Masters Board, brethren. Elgin's Lodge at Leven have a journal on their Master's dais, and it records the signatures of the Master and his initiates every year. That journal's still there, and as you can see, during his year as Master, there was 19 candidates initiated by the Field Marshal Earl Haig. My mother lodge, we were named after him. We now meet in Elgin's Lodge at Leven, funnily enough, and they were one of our sponsors, and 16 of their brethren came together to form Earl Haig. He gifted us his first pattern cavalry sword, which is still used by our sword bearer in the lodge today. And we've been given permission to use the Haig family crest on our stationery and their motto, Tide What May. That sword, Brian, was lost to war scholars and war historians until we developed a website in the late 90s, early noughties. And we had a rush of interest for people wanting to come and look at it and touch it, because it is a sword that is used in most of the statues that you see of Haig, particularly the one just up from the cenotaph on Whitehall. It's an open invite, Brian. Anybody wanting to visit us, we tile it 1915. You may get a wee nip of Cameron Brigg, because incidentally that could have been her name, but it went to a vote and Earl Haig won by 2 or 3 names. Cameron Brigg, for you connoisseurs, is now Haig Club, and it's marketed by Beckham and Diageo, but it's actually the same stuff that's in the bottle. It's just the bottle's more expensive now, Brian. I want to take you across from the kingdom now, Brian, into Edinburgh, to that mighty castle sat high above Princes Street in the Norloch. It's obvious to anybody that it's got clear military advantages, and it's been a hill fort since Iron Age. A statue of Haig sits within the Hospital Square in the castle, but to me, it's the home of the Scottish National War Museum. In the photos there, Brian, you'll see past Deputy Grandmaster Mason Brother Ewan Rutherford, who attended an event, the History of the Poppy with me, during 2018. And the chap in uniform is Major General Alistair Bruce of Creanach, who's an English Freemason. He's the cousin of Lord Elgin, and he's currently the governor of Edinburgh Castle, and as a reservist. And he is the first full-time reservist to take over the governorship of Edinburgh Castle. Again, a very engaging and well-known man. You may have seen him on Sky's News reporting about the Queen, and he, in fact, interviewed Her Majesty a few years ago. The Scottish National War Memorial, Brian, however, commemorates those Scottish casualties in the First and Second World Wars, and it's been updated to include the various campaigns since 1945. The memorial, for those who visited, is found in Crown Square at the very top of the rock, and its architect, Sir Robert Lorimer, engaged 200 other Scottish artists and craftsmen to display it. But why am I talking about that when I'm talking about Freemasonry and Remembrance, Brian? Well, for the very fact that the moving force behind this vision of a Scottish National War Memorial was John George Murray, the 8th Duke of Atholl. He was a leading member of the Scottish aristocracy. The Duke of Atholl, or Bardi as he was known from his title, the Marquis of Tullibardine, was a serving soldier who'd fought in the Sudan, raised the Scottish horse yeomanry, and he was a man of considerable vision and energy. And what was more important, he had both influence and connections, not just Masonic connections. He just happened to also be the Master of the Lodge of Dunkeld, St John number 14, and the Grand Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, 1909 to 1913. And you can see a cartoon drawn from Vanity Fair of him there, one of the paintings within the Lodge of Dunkeld. And for those of you that are in other orders, this is one of the carvings that can be found in the Scottish National War Memorial. So for those of you in the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, you will see the symbolism there. In the spring of 17, he gathered around him a number of leading and powerful Scots. I won't read out the names apart from one, Sir Hector Munro of Fowlis. He was a past master of Lodge Fingal up in the Black Isle, and he became the first provincial Grand Master of Ross and Cromarty. Munro of Fowlis only knew too well the tragedy of war, as he lost his son and his heir, who was killed in action while serving with the 2nd Battalion Seaforth Highlanders. Captain George S.C. Swinton, Brian, out of interest, his granddaughter is Tilda Swinton, the Hollywood actress who you'll have seen in many, many films. Brian, moving on to how the Grand Lodge of Scotland, in my opinion, have commemorated Remembrance over the years, or in latter years. Probably our most famous export, our most famous worldwide brother is Robert Burns. And he wrote about Remembrance, in my opinion, way back in the day. When wild war's deadly blast, the poem that he wrote. When wild war's deadly blast was blown, and gentle peace returning, when mony a sweet babe fatherless, and mony a widow mourning, I left the lines in tented field, where lang I'd been a lodger, my humble knapsack, all my wealth, a poor nod is sudger. In the aftermath of the war, the Grand Lodge encouraged lodges that had Bren who served to create a roll of honour. And Bren, I would ask you, if your lodge was around back then, but you don't know where your roll of honour is, please look it out. They're beautiful, some of them. The one on the extreme left is from Port Glasgow, the building for a couple of lodges, and one of the lodges there, Lodge New Monkland Montrose, with fewer names. But some have got many names on them, and they list the name and the corps, the regiment or the service. A lot of time, dedication and energy spent putting these together. As a craft, as a fraternity, we also honoured our Bren by creating memorial tablets. And in most lodges you will see that were around during the First World War, you will see a memorial tablet of some forms. The one on the left is the one at Broughty Castle. The centre one is part of the dais of the lodge in Crown Street in Aberdeen. So the furniture became their memorial. And the one on my right, as I look at my screen, is from Mother Kilwinning. Dumbarton Kilwinning, for the Second World War, they created a stained glass window as their commemoration piece. In Forfarshire, it was more public. They pulled together money for the Arbroath Cenotaph, and you can see that in the Western Cemetery, and that was dedicated and opened by the Provincial Grand Master of Forfarshire at the time, Brother Arthur James Ramsay. In my own lodge, Bren, we didn't have a war memorial, and we didn't think we had anyone who had given the greatest sacrifice. But about 7-8 years ago, we got a letter from Canada from a serving warrant officer in the Canadian Army asking about his grandfather. And in his grandfather's flying book, logbook, there was a receipt for him joining Lodge Errol Haig. He'd only had his enter apprentice and his fellow craft degree, so his name wasn't recorded at Grand Lodge. And that's probably why we didn't know about him. But we felt that we needed to recognise his sacrifice. And we had this plaque commissioned, and it was unveiled by Brother Andrew Patterson, our Provincial Grand Master at the time. Brother Watson was actually quite a famous brother at the time. He played football for Partick Thistle. He went down south. He played in the semi-final of the FA Cup for Huddersfield at the time. And he was killed in action. I do a full paper on him, and it's on the Lodge Hope of Karachi pages if you want to read that, brother. Freemasonry Remembrance today, Bren, out with Royal British Legion Scotland group of purchases. The Masonic fraternity in Scotland is the biggest contributor to purchasing reefs across the country. We have the Masonic plot in the Field of Remembrance that I'll just come on to, and we've got poppy makers at our Bren, and as you would imagine, many Bren currently serving are brethren, and many veterans are brethren. The photograph is taken at Crieff, and that is Captain Paddy Marshall of the Black Watch. He is a member of the Lodge in Blairgowrie. So back in 2012, Brian, we, with the permission of Poppy Scotland, we took over one of the plots in Princess Street Gardens, and we made it the Masonic plot. And since then, the Scottish Craft has raised over £120,000 for Poppy Scotland. Grand Lodge and Provincial Grand Lodges purchase one cross for every lodge at home, and is planted by a group of volunteers. And then other Bren can buy their own crosses or other symbols, religious symbols, or a humanist symbol to plant. And they're planted late October, early November by a group of volunteers. There's a lot of preparation goes into stamping the crosses, Bren. Huge amounts of biscuits are consumed and a lot of NATO standard tea drunk. You can see Davy Shearer from Lodge Bulgoni there hard at work, and you can see my Worspool Junior Warden doing what he's good at, complaining that he's not got any tea or biscuits in front of him and he's on strike before he stamps any more crosses. But great thanks to all those Bren who have helped over the years, the Bren from my own province and the tour guides in Grand Lodge. So there's some photographs of the Bren planting them. It's always a good day out there, a good interaction with the public, but importantly, it shows the craft in good light with the general public. Afterwards, we generally retire to this building. Many of you may know it if you're from Edinburgh. And as you can see, that on the left and that on the right. But unfortunately, it generally costs me a lot of money. But it's my way of saying thank you to the volunteers. A few years ago, Brian, the Edinburgh Sketcher, I sketched an iconic photo painting of Jenner's with the Masonic field and plot. So that's still available from edinburghsketcher.com. And as you can see below that, there is a certificate of appreciation and thanks that was presented to the Grand Lodge in 2017. That now needs to be updated with the new total Bren, which I'll ensure happens. Grand Lodge itself, they didn't have a war memorial in the building. And in October 2015, just after the start of the 4 or 5 year period of commemoration, they commissioned this new memorial. It was opened by Lord Elgin. And importantly, the memorials to all Bren, not just those that took the King or Queen shilling. And as you can see on the frieze Bren, there's fishermen, there's miners, there's sailors, there's animals, there's soldiers, there's airmen, and there's sailors. And when you go into Grand Lodge, it's just to your left before you go into the main temple. It's a beautiful creation that I know will last for many, many years to come. And now annually, that is where Grand Lodge lay their wreaths. In 2018, we also had a tour of remembrance with the Widow's Sons, and they toured the length and breadth of the country. We visited every provincial Grand Lodge, and we achieved many great things during that period of time, not less than £60,000 that was raised for Poppy Scotland. I think of all the visits that we partook in, my favourite one had to be the visit to the new province of the Scottish Borders. It was the first time they'd been out as a province in their new regalia, and we laid the wreaths at the grave of the Field Marshal. And that day, Brian, every day when you're involved in remembrance is poignant, but particularly that day, as we lay those wreaths at his graveside, there was something really special. And maybe it was just our way as a Scottish craft saying thank you to Brother Field Marshal for all that he's achieved for us. It went across the country. We had civic involvement, Lord Lieutenants, councillors. So again, it brought the Scottish craft into the public domain. There was fantastic press coverage. We had nearly 80 articles in regional papers across the land. And you can see the Widow's Sons Scotland there outside the Grand Lodge on the last day before they came down to the Lady Hague Poppy Factory for a bit of a barbecue, a sing-song and a thank you. Many of you will have purchased this badge. It's the only official Poppy Scotland and Grand Lodge of Scotland pin badge. So if you do see any others out there, Brian, I would just remind you that the money doesn't go to what it's meant to go to, and that is supporting the Armed Forces community in need. And to round off the commemoration period of the Great War, Grand Lodge of Scotland held a service of remembrance where we paraded along George Street, and it was probably the first time in many decades that the Grand Lodge had paraded in Edinburgh. It was a very special day. The Padres done themselves proud, and it was just a perfect culmination to me of how we as a craft commemorated. What I hadn't said earlier, Brian, that we, as a craft, we were not officially involved in any wreath-laying ceremonies up until 2014. And the chap on my right in the photograph that I'm pictured with, that chap's Kevin Gray, Military Medal. I approached him on behalf of Grand Lodge after we'd done 1 or 2 fields of remembrance to ask if Grand Lodge could become officially part of the nation's remembrance and lay a wreath as part of the procession in Edinburgh on Remembrance Sunday. At that time, Kevin was not a Freemason. He didn't really know anything about us. And he went away and he done some research, and he came back, and he then invited Brother Charles Ian and Robert Woolridge Gordon at the time to join the official wreath laying party at Edinburgh City Chambers. But that piqued his interest, Brian, and he went and spoke to the National Treasurer of Legion Scotland, who happened to be a Freemason. And a year later, he joined the craft. He's now a very dedicated Freemason. But to me, it's a very nice story how Remembrance was a big part of his journey into Freemasonry. Other ways that we've commemorated over the last few years is the Victoria Crosses, coins, tokens that lodges have commissioned, some for charity, some for their lodge funds. But again, it's a very nice tribute, particularly the VC ones. And just yesterday, I received the latest one in the series that has been issued by Lodge St Andrew, number 52, Banff, in memory of Brother Corporal Colin F. Barron. I now need to look into his history and find out a little bit more about him. So going south, Brian, I looked at what the United Grand Lodge of England have done for Remembrance. And to celebrate the end of World War I, a special Grand Lodge was held at the Albert Hall in June. The Grand Master at the time was Arthur, Duke of Connaught, again, a Field Marshal. And it was announced that the Duke wanted to create a fitting memorial to the fallen Freemasons, a new home for English Freemasonry. The Duke was initiated into Prince of Wales Lodge in 1901. He wanted to have a perpetual memorial. That perpetual memorial became Freemasons Hall in Great Queen Street. And the financing for the building was raised by the Masonic Million Memorial Fund. And they raised over £1 million to help build this temple. The current building is the third on the site, and it was built between 27 and 33 in Art Deco style, and I'm sure many of you listening to me have visited it. But did you know that it was, and it is, a war memorial, and it is dedicated to the 3,225 Masons who died in active service in World War I. Well, there's a Masonic dinner to behold, Brian. It was held in Olympia in 1925, 7,000 Brian there, 1,250 waitresses, 5 miles of table, 50,000 plates. You can just see our poor stewards getting run off their feet trying to arrange that nowadays. When we look at what our annual installation of Grand Master Mason is maybe under 1,000 Brian. To try and help raise the funds, they commissioned what's termed Hallstone Lodge Jewel. And the contributions were marked by Brian of an award of a medal, and you can see them there, Brian. If you donated 10 guineas, you received a silver one. If you gave more than 100 guineas, a gold one. If a lodge contributed an average of 10 guineas per member, they were recorded in the building as a Hallstone Lodge. And each master was entitled to wear one as a special medal. By the end of the appeal, 53,000 medals had been issued. And unfortunately, you can see them and buy them on eBay just now, particularly the silver one, Brian. In December, a roll of honour was completed of all members, and in June 1921, 3 years after the war, the roll was declared complete. It can now be found in the Grand Lodge in an Ark of a Covenant casket that depicts and it hosts it. The four corners stood pairs of winged seraphim with golden trumpets, and across the front is gilded with figures of Moses, Joshua, Solomon, and St. George. And again, Brian, if you do get the opportunity, please visit. And there's a closer photo of it. And you can see kneeling on top representatives of the four services: the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, Army, and the Royal Flying Corps. Royal Flying Corps because the Royal Air Force didn't come into being until the 1st of April 1918. Moving away from the Royal British Legion and poppy elements, there were other organisations founded around the time. And one of the most important was the Imperial War Graves Commission. And they were tasked with ensuring that there was a memorial for all those that were fallen, because we couldn't bring them back, and many of them are buried where they fell. And they then looked after the shrines to them for those that were unnamed and that we didn't know, so it gave the family some place to go. And the founder of the Imperial War Graves Commission was also a brother. He was Brother Major General Sir Fabian Arthur Gulston Ware. He was an educator, he was a journalist, and he founded the War Graves Commission, which we now know as the Commonwealth War Graves. If you've never been to one of the war graves, Brian, again, I would encourage you to try and do so. Out of that, and I won't read this in full, Brian, and the builders of the Silent Cities lodges were formed. The first one was formed under the Grand Lodge National Français, and Ware was one of its founder members. It was mainly made up of Brian from the War Graves Commission, and when the lodge moved its headquarters to Arras. For Scottish Masons, Arras is very important as well because it was the site of the largest battle that Scots fought in our history, the Battle of Arras. Another brother was a member of that lodge, and a brother that you will know, and he's Brother Roger Kipling. And it was him who gave the title its lodge. And as you would expect from a writer of Kipling's stature, it was both a truly inspiring, moving, and just beautiful, simple term. Because when you look at those gravestones, you can imagine them that it is a silent city, because it's row after row after row. Kipling also, like Fowlis, knew the grief of having lost a son, and his son was lost at the Battle of Lewes in September 1915. The lodge, when the commission came back to the UK, the lodge decided to form a lodge under the United Grand Lodge of England as lodge number 4948. The Major General joined, became a founding member, and he went on to become the master of it. That lodge is still in existence, Bern, and I would encourage you to try and visit it. They do have a fantastic website where I've taken a lot of this information from it, and I do give them acknowledgement towards the end of this presentation, but please have a look at their website. The National Memorial Arboretum, Bern, is the last area that I want to touch on in England, that was opened in 1997 as our nation's place of pilgrimage and homage. And in 2017, as part of the tercentenary commemorations of the Grand Lodge of England, they decided to dedicate a specific Masonic memorial. And when you come out of the NMA buildings, to your right, you can see the Masonic Memorial Gardens. There's in its construction, you can see the checkered pavement. And when you look to the left from that, when you're standing there, you come across the wall, which is the centrepiece of the National Memorial Arboretum. Again, Bren, I've been privileged to have visited that with work on numerous occasions, and it is one of the most haunting places, peaceful but inspirational places in our nation. And again, I would encourage you to visit. The Victoria Cross, Bren. The VC is the highest award for gallantry that can be conferred on a member of the British Armed Forces, and was first introduced in 1856. You can see there's two colours to the ribbon, Brian. Many of you would just think it was the purple on the left on my screen and the blue, but in the early days the blue was for those who served in the Royal Navy, who were awarded the Victoria Cross for gallantry. But arguably, Brian, it was down to a Freemason that the VC was introduced. A Scottish Freemason at that. Foxmall Ramsay, the 11th Earl of Dalhousie. He was the Senior Grand Warden of the United Grand Lodge of England, and he was Grand Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1867. The original idea was an idea by Lord Newcastle, but it didn't get much traction. But Lord Panmure, as he was colloquially known as well, he approached Prince Albert. Prince Albert was inspired by the idea, and he took it on, and he took it to Queen Victoria, and again she wanted this to happen. So again, Freemasonry had its hands in the award, the start of the history of the Victoria Cross. Lodge Panmure in Forfarshire takes their name from the Earl of Dalhousie. During their tercentenary commemorations, the Grand Lodge of England wanted to commemorate that, and they dedicated a pavement outside the Grand Lodge of England building, and that a stone inside. And you can see the Duke of Kent, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England, with the sculptor, and that's within Grand Lodge now. And it's interesting to note that more than 200 Freemasons have been awarded the Victoria Cross since 1856, and that's an astonishing 14% of recipients. The 64 in the pavement included 3 of the famous 6 VCs before breakfast awarded to members of the 1st Battalion, the Lancashire Fusiliers at Gallipoli on the 25th of April. The 25th of April was my wedding anniversary, brethren, so again, I feel a connection that ties me back in wherever I go within this research that I keep on doing. Corporal John Eliza Grimshaw of Langattock Lodge. Captain Richard Raymond Willis of the Lodge St John and St Paul. And Major Cuthbert Bromley in Victor Lodge. I won't go into the testimony about each of them, Brian, due to time constraints, but you will be able to see them when this is downloaded. But you can also Google 6 VCs before breakfast and read it about it yourself. I would encourage you to invest in these books for your libraries, Brian. The one by Granville Angel, The Great War, 1914 to 18, Victoria Cross Freemasons, and Bob Cooper's book, Famous Scottish Freemasons, lists and talks about our Scottish VC holders. Another website for you to visit, Brian, is the Masonic Great War Project, which is a Masonic roll of honour for the English Constitution. Again, a lot of moving stories about our Brian. Another famous Freemason whose portrait hangs within the Grand Lodge of Scotland was the King, our present Queen's father. He said that Freemasonry was one of the greatest influences on his life, and the peace stamps that were issued, the 3 pence, after the end of the Second World War, is full of Masonic allegory and symbolism, albeit to the general public, they just feel that it represents rebuilding and peace. But to the trained Masonic eye, we can see that. And I'm sure the King, when he saw them, was very proud of those Masonic stamps. Incidentally, the 11th of June, Brian, is my birthday. So another date that ties me into this whole story. So across the water to have a quick look at the Grand Lodge of Ireland and what they're doing, and I found some interesting things in the north. The west front of the cathedral in Belfast was opened by the 3rd Duke of Abercorn, the Governor of Northern Ireland, who was the Provincial Grand Master of Londonderry and Donegal. They raised money for it by subscription and from the Masons. Finances were always tight, and I've borrowed this from Bob Bashford, who spoke at Lodge Hope a few weeks ago, and it shows the original fundraising ask letter that went out to the brethren, asking them to donate to this project. And on the pillars within it, in recognition of the support of the Masonic community, the inscriptions were placed. In strength, I will establish this mine house to stand firm forever. And the top left is the craft, the Royal Arch, Knights Templar, and Ancient and Accepted Rite, as it's called over there. Arthur Square Masonic Hall in Belfast, again, like the Grand Lodge of Scotland, had no memorials in the building, although it predated World War I. And to coincide with the 150th anniversary, a new one was commissioned and unveiled earlier this year. So let's just have a quick jump across the United States of America, Brian. Arguably a Masonic constitution, a Masonic country. I want to look at the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and the Grand Lodge of Virginia very quickly, Brian. Memorial Day, and I will come on and explain what Memorial Day is. And in Boston, Memorial Day is recognised when members of Prince Hall Freemasonry make a pilgrimage to the grave of Prince Hall, who was the founder of Black Freemasonry in the United States. Prince Hall was one of the first abolitionists and a Freemason. And again, on a recent talk at the lockdown lectures from Moses Gomez, we heard talk of Brother Prince Hall and his activities. Remembrance is slightly different here from what we're talking about because it predates the First World War. Memorial Day, originally known as Decoration Day, was officially declared on May the 5th, 1868 by Major General Logan in his role as a commander of a relatively new fraternal group, the Grand Army of the Republic. Brother Logan was raised as a Mason in Mitchell Lodge 85 in Pinckneyville, Illinois. He was a York Rite Mason and Templar in Chicago. He was also a member of the Scottish Rite, and he was elected to be coroneted a 33rd degree in 1886, but died before it could be conferred on the 26th of December. He was also elected to Congress and Senate. So we know that Brother Field Marshal Earl Haig based the British Legion structure loosely on the Masonic structure, and now I'm suggesting to you that Major General Logan founded the Grand Army of the Republic on similar principles and structures. The Grand Army of the Republic, in effect, is the American British Legion. You can see a variety of photographs there, and if you didn't know, you would think there was some Masonic symbolism in there. And the 3-cent postcard, postage stamp depicts Professor Moyna Michaels, the lady I spoke about at the beginning of the presentation. What we've been seeing more recently in these neck of the woods is the empty or vacant chair ceremony, and that's thought to date back to 1875. And that's a way that Masons can remember their brethren that gave the ultimate sacrifice. And historically, that was done on Memorial Day in American lodges. And it talks about the connection between the North and the South in the United States, as does this monument, the Friend to Friend monument. It depicts Confederate Brigadier General Lewis Armistead, a Freemason, who was wounded after crossing the wall during the climax of Pickett's charge, being attended to by Union Captain Henry Bingham, also a Freemason. So, as it says on the memorial, a brotherhood undivided. Going up to the Dominion Burn, the words of Right Worshipful Brother Sir Arthur Currie that he delivered in an address to the Canadian Corps in March 1918 expressed these thoughts, particularly poignant if you visited Vimy Ridge. To those who fall I say, you will not die but step into immortality. Your mothers will not lament your fate but will be proud to have borne such sons. Your names will be revered forever and ever by your grateful country, and God will take you unto himself. The picture shows Vimy Ridge, the memorial at Vimy Ridge Burn. Military historians agree that the innovative tactics and careful planning and constant practice under Brother General Sir Arthur Currie led to the unexpected triumph. And Bren, when I say it's a ridge, it is a ridge. It's like that. And the views you receive from standing on that memorial around the battlefields are immense. General Sir Arthur William Currie, he was born in Strathroy. He moved to British Columbia and he was initiated in Vancouver in Quadra Lodge No. 2 in Victoria in 1898. Served as Worshipful Master in 1904 and he subsequently served as District Deputy Grand Master for Victoria. He affiliated with Zetland Lodge in Toronto and his Masonic regalia is deposited in the Canadian War Museum, Ottawa. He was knighted by the King in 1917 and he went on to become the Vice Chancellor of McGill University, a position he held until his death. So again, another of the countries that are associated with Remembrance, a Freemason has been at the fore. The storming of Vimy Ridge on Easter Day 1917, a landmark in the course of Canadian history, because it was the first major victory of the war that was won by Canadians alone. In those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation. Another brother, Brother King Edward VIII, a member of the Household Brigade Lodge number 2016, as we know, Brian, He was only king for a few short years, not even a year actually. And he went to visit and unveiled the monument at Vimy. And he said, "We raise this memorial to Canadian warriors. It is an inspired expression in stone, chiselled by a skillful Canadian hand. It marks the scene of feats of arms which history will long remember and Canada will never forget." But when you look at the sculptures around it, they're all allegorical figures. And I believe, Bren, having visited it, that it resonates with Masonic symbolism. And I want to believe that it was influenced by Freemasonry. Coming towards the end of our tour of the Empire, Bern, Anzac Day, the 25th of April. Anzac was the name given to the combined forces of the Imperial Force New Zealand Army, the troops that landed at Gallipoli. 2,000 Anzacs would die that first day on the beaches. 10,000 Anzacs would not return home to their loved ones. The Shrine of Remembrance, the foundation stone was laid in November 1927 by the Governor of Victoria, Lord Somers. In addition to being the Governor, popular history will forget, or they will neglect to mention, at the time he was also the 12th Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. Most of the construction of the shrine was raised in less than 6 months. And again, Freemasons had a hand in it. And according to the Melbourne newspaper, that the Freemasons had raised £5,000 from many lodges. Again, Masonic involvement and remembrance across the world. Coming back to the fields of battle, Bern, just as I come towards the end, Belgium. The Second World War, a lodge of Belgian Freemasons was founded in one of the prisoner of war camps. The Masonic Lodge Liberté Chérie inside Hut 6 of Emsland Lager 7. The name of the lodge was derived from La Marseillaise. They later initiated Pastor Ray's brother Fernand Héroux, another Belgium, into it, and they elected their own master. Interestingly, it was a Catholic priest stood watch so that the Bern could hold their meetings and protected their secrecy. And at that time, the papal bull against Freemasonry was very strong. The Grand Orient of Belgium, however, is not in amity with the Grand Lodge of Scotland, but I felt it was important to show the commemorative memorial that still stands there for those Belgian Freemasons. Germany, an occupied land. Freemasonry in Germany is a presentation that's coming up in the lockdown lecture series from Lodge Hope of Karachi, but I will touch on it just briefly here, Bren. I served in Germany for a year in the Royal Air Force, and I visited the Lodge Star of Saxony near Rheindalen under the Grand Lodge of British Freemasons in Germany. And it was there that I first came to hear the story of the Forget-Me-Not. And there's a variety of stories about the Forget-Me-Not being used as a Masonic symbol. This is the one I tend to believe, but it's up to each individual to believe in what they want to. And it was to do with the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Germany, Dr. Theodor Vogel. He distributed the Forget-Me-Not pin as a token of friendship when he was making visits after the war, and most notably at a conference of Grand Masters in Washington, D.C. in February 1953, where he recounted the tragic tale of Freemasonry under the Nazis. He explained how the blue Forget-Me-Not became a German Masonic emblem after the war and why. Then American Freemasons later founded military lodges in Germany, and at least one chose that flare as the lodge name. So there are other stories out there about the Forget-Me-Not, Bern, but to me that is the most factual one. Military and Freemasonry, Bern, I'm not going to even touch on. It's a huge encyclopedia of topics in its own rights, but there has been a connection with the military and Freemasonry from the earliest days. The earliest days of the travelling military warrants, lodges with regimental connection, the circuit of service lodges that we see just now under the United Grand Lodge of England. And I think camaraderie, fraternity and brotherhood are words that mean exactly the same. The Circuit of Service Lodges was formed in 1993 and currently comprises 42 lodges. And to qualify, you must prove that you've got a distinguishable military culture. They participate as a platoon every year in the annual march past of the Cenotaph, and they've taken on battlefield tours. And there you can see the logos of the circuit lodges, Brian. So, Remembrance of Freemasonry, Brian. Hopefully you've pondered during this presentation, why do we as a Freemason take part in remembrance in such a public way? Why do we as Freemasons continue to remember? Do our rituals encourage remembrance? Was it our teachings that inspired remembrance? But an additional question to ponder. Why do we not have as many of the great and the good of society in our membership anymore? The likes of those we have met in this presentation. So, Ecclesiastes 12, as I come back to the third degree. I won't go through it all, you know it, Brian. But because man goeth to his long home, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. I started with Bunyan's lines, and I'll end with the Kohima epitaph. That is traditional in remembrance services now. The Kohima epitaph, the words were attributed to John Maxwell Edmonds, an English classicist who'd put them together among a collection of epitaphs for World War I. The Kohima Memorial is to do with Burma and the Far East, and we're coming up to VJ Day, Brian. And I think we as Brian should also commemorate those in the way that we commemorated them around VE Day. But interestingly, and something I learned due to the lockdown lectures at the Lodge Hope of Karachi's very recently by Brother Martin Fox, he talked about a man that I'd never heard of. That man was the Greek lyric and poet Simonides of Chaos, who wrote after the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, "Go tell the Spartans, thou that passes by, that faithful to their precepts, here we lie." Well, Roman legend claims that Simonides of Chaos was the inventor of the method of Loci, where large amounts of data can be remembered in order by placing images that represent the data into mental locations or journey. So Simonides' art of memory, through William Shaw and his second statutes of the operatives that became the speculatives, is today what I believe is our ritual. Brian, I'd like to thank those that I've listed in front. I won't read out the organisations, but I will read out the people. Countess Jane Haig, my fellow veterans, Brother Captain David Swain, Bob Cooper, Raymond Daniels, and Robert Bashford, and all those other magazines for the support in pulling together this compilation of stories of remembrance. So Brian, when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave her today. Brian, thank you.
I think you'll agree, brethren, that today the lecture by Gordon was of an immense knowledge. It was well presented and indeed thought-provoking. And I'd like to congratulate Gordon, and I'm sure you would all like to congratulate him. And if there's any questions you'd like to put to Gordon, please just raise your hands on the screen and I will ask you to put your question to Gordon. I haven't unmuted you all, so we'll do. I should be all unmuted now, brother, if you want to ask a question.
Silence is golden. Thank you, Brian.
Gordon.
Bruce.
You were pointing out these books you were speaking about to have in your library. You know, with my eyesight problems, is there any of these books available on like talking books or something?
There are a variety that are audible books, Bruce. What I'll do, I will get you some links and I'll send them to you.
That'll be great. Much appreciated, Gordon, for that.
My pleasure, sir.
Anyone else?
I'll take that, Brother MacLeod.
Excellent. You may have to do some work.
What was that? Didn't hear that one.
Saying I have to go and you have to go and do some work. But well done.
Okay, thank you. Right, Brian, as usual, I'll stop recording now, and this will be up on our Facebook pages later. Thank you for joining us at the Lodge Hope of Karachi for this impromptu presentation to say thank you to those that are currently serving in our regular and reserve forces at the end of Armed Forces Week here in the United Kingdom. So I look forward to welcome you all back this Tuesday for our next lockdown lecture. So I'm just going to stop recording. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Gordon.
Well done, brother.